Hello everyone, good day. My name is Joanna Cabal, and for today's presentation is all about the experimental method.
Experimental method is basically a collection of research designs, guidelines for using them, principle and procedures for determining statistical significance, and also criteria for determining the quality of a study. The experimental method is also a systematic approach to research in which the researchers manipulates one or more variables in which controls and measure any change in other variable. Now let's have the types of experimental research design in which determined by the way the researchers assign subject to different condition and groups. We have pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, and true experimental research. In pre-experimental research design, either a group or various dependent groups are observed for the effect of the application of an independent variable which is presumed to cause change. It is the simplest form of experimental research design and is treated with no control group. Next is the quasi-experimental. The word quasi means partial, half, or pseudo. Therefore, the quasi-experimental research bearing a resemblance to the true experimental research, but not the same. In quasi-experiments, the participants are not randomly assigned, and as such, they are used in settings where randomization is difficult or impossible. Now, in true experimental research, it relies on statistical analysis to prove or disprove a hypothesis, making it the most accurate form of research. One of the types of experimental design, only true design can establish a cause-effect relationship within the group. Well, I can say that the word experimental research has a range of definition. Now let's proceed on the steps involved in conducting an experimental study. First is we have identify and define the problem. Next is review relevant literature. Formulate hypotheses and deduce their consequence. Construct an experimental design. Conduct experiment. Compile raw data and condense to usable form. And for the last is present findings and conclusion. Okay, we have the first step, identify and define the problem. In this step, after deciding the topic of interest, the researchers tries to define the research problem. This could help you to focus on a more narrow research area to be able to study it appropriately. And also it will help you to formulate a research hypothesis. Next is review relevant literature. So in this literature, it helps the researchers whether the topic is worth studying, and it provides insight into ways in which the researchers can limit the scope to a needed area of inquiry. Next is formulate hypotheses and deduce their consequence. So in this step, it is almost impossible for a research not to have any hypothesis or objectives before proceeding with his works, because a hypothesis or the objective shows the direction to our researchers. That is why in the experimental research, the research design is built around a tentative hypothesis or clearly defined objectives. Next is construct experiment design. In this design, it represents all the elements, condition, and relation. Next step is conduct the experiment. So an experiment is typically carried out by manipulating a variable. This is called the independent variable. So affecting the experimental group, the effect of the researchers is interested in the dependent variables or variable as measured. So in this design, this is often done by controlling variables if possible, or randomizing variables to minimize effect that can be traced back to third variables. Researchers only want to measure the effect of the independent variable when conducting an experiment, allowing them to conclude that this was the reason for the effect. Next is compile raw data and condense to usable form. In this step, when the experiment is imposed to a specific variable, related data should be collected and compiled in systematic way. So after analyzing the compiled data, it should be condensed to a usable form. And for the last step, which is present findings and conclusion. So the aim of an analysis is to draw a conclusion together with the other observation. The researchers might generalize the result to a wider phenomenon if there is no indication of confounding variables polluting the result. If the researchers suspect that the effects stem from a different variable than the independent variable, further investigation is needed to gauge the validity of the result. At last, an experiment is often conducted because the scientist wants to know if the independent variable is having any effect upon the dependent variable. Variables correlating are not proof that there is no causation. Experiments are more often of quantitative nature than qualitative nature, although it happens.